The Orlando Magic are aiming to compete for a championship. How do they get there? Well, there's only one way to find out, through the lens of one of their big competitors today. We go one-on-one with Locked On Knicks, Gavin Schall on Locked On Magic.
You are Locked On Magic, your daily Orlando Magic podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
And you are indeed Locked On Magic. Today is August 19th. It will be August 20th, 2025. My name is Philip Rossman-Reich. I'm the senior writer over at OrlandoMagicDaily.com, credentialed member of the Orlando Magic media since the 2012 season. On today's episode of Locked On Magic, we go one-on-one with Gavin Schall of Locked On Knicks, frequent guest of the show, frequent crossover guest, because the Magic and Knicks are both actually really good now. And there's actually a reason for us to talk other than like, man, wouldn't it be great if we were both good? The Magic and Knicks, obviously two of the favorites to come out of the Eastern Conference. We'll break down why the Magic are title contenders, what questions the Knicks have to answer. And actually, we're going to make this a two-parter. We'll talk about how the Magic and Knicks face off and match up as we look ahead to a potential Eastern Conference semifinals or Eastern Conference finals matchup with the New York Knicks. We're going to get to all that coming up here in just a moment. First, we want to thank you again for making Locked On Magic part of your day every day. No matter when you listen to us, whether it's first thing in the morning, whether it's right when we upload, we truly appreciate you making Locked On Magic part of your day every day. We truly appreciate all of our Orlando Magic dailies who make Locked On Magic part of their day, every episode, 5 days a week. Join the Orlando Magic dailies crew before the season starts. Get into the habit now, because this is going to be a fun one, as this episode will very, very clearly demonstrate. The Locked On Podcast Network, it's your team every day. Today's episode of Locked On Magic is brought to you by Monarch Money. Take control of your finances with Monarch Money. Use code LOCKEDONNBA at monarchmoney.com for 50% off your first year. We're going to get right to it. I don't want to waste too much time. We got 2 episodes. The next 2 episodes will be all about the Magic and the Knicks. Before we get to it, I stumbled there. I false started there. Before we get to it, we will talk later in the week. We will talk on Friday's episode about 2 things. First, Spain playing Germany. We're going to get back to some Eurobasket stuff. Georgia played today. They'll play their final warm-up game on Thursday. We'll talk about the Spain-Germany game on Friday. We'll also talk about the news that came out just before recording this today. Shaquille O'Neal will indeed present Dwight Howard at the Basketball Hall of Fame induction ceremony. A really, really cool thing. I have a lot of thoughts on it. I want to make sure I give it its due time, but I want to recognize it here today before we dive in today's episode, because I'm really happy that Shaq and Dwight aren't beefing anymore. I'm happy that we're beginning to let them both back into the fold. We'll get you your naysayers and people who are still a little sore about both. We'll get you on our side here in a minute. But really, really awesome to see Shaq presenting Dwight Howard for his Hall of Fame enshrinement here coming up in the next few weeks. Now, I don't want to waste too much time. Let's get into it with Locked On Knicks, Gavin Schall.
All right, as promised, I'm joined by Philip Rossman-Reich of the Locked On Magic podcast. You can also find his work as a senior writer over at Orlando Magic Daily. Of course, if you're turning in on the Locked On Magic side of things, I'm Gavin Schall, co-host of the Locked On Knicks podcast. Philip, great to talk to you as always, man. How's your summer been so far?
It's been good. It's been quiet, a little too hot, but that's life these days.
Wow, dark start. Okay. Anyways,
this is not a dark podcast. There were years where Magic Knicks crossover would be a dark podcast. These are happy times, my friend. Happy times.
I didn't know we were opening with climate change. All right, let's go optimistic. Do you consider the Orlando Magic a legitimate threat to get out of the Eastern Conference? I think by some people, there's been some poo-pooing of that idea, given that they obviously haven't gotten out of the first round yet with this current group, given their offensive struggles over the last almost decade and a half now. And I think some people not loving the Desmond Bane trade. And I personally think, like, again, to whatever you think of the trade, and I personally thought it was a great move. Even if you thought Orlando moved too many assets, like, I think it's undeniable the way it changes the complexion of this Magic's team, addresses pretty clearly their biggest weakness, unless you want to argue that's initiation, and we can talk about that. But I think they are just fantastically positioned, and with a little bit better health luck, like, they are probably right behind the Knicks and Cavs as the favorites in the Eastern Conference, even if I think there might be a tier drop off there. But do I have that right in your mind? Do you think the Magic could legitimately get out of the East?
Yeah, I mean, look, we've seen this the way the Eastern Conference has gone the last few years, and with Boston kind of out of the way, with Indiana kind of out of the way, and again, maybe those teams will be better than we anticipate, but I don't think we view them without Tyrese Halliburton, without Jason Tatum as true title contenders. It feels wide open. Like it feels like it's wide open, and we've seen in the East playoffs over the last 2 years just how like an injury at the wrong time can really throw you off and really throw even elite teams out of the picture or off the trail. So, like, do I think the Magic are going to make the NBA Finals? If you asked me to put a bet down on it, I'd probably say no. That's not a good bet for all the reasons that you said. Like, for all the talent and all the things that this team has done, like they haven't done it before. Like the New York Knicks have one playoff series. The Cleveland Cavaliers have one playoff series. The Magic have not done that yet as a group. They have the talent. They're clearly kind of positioned to do that. They're not, they've got a lot to prove on the court. But if everything breaks the right way, this is a team with an elite defense that really just needs a little bit of an offensive boost to get themselves over the hump. They added a really impressive third, fourth scorer, wherever you want to put him in the pecking order, in Desmond Bane. And honestly, like, as I've listened to a lot of people kind of talk about the Magic or try to downplay the Magic's chances, I keep thinking, like, you all forget this team won 47 games 2 years ago. They won 41 games last year, despite Jalen Suggs playing only 36 games, despite Mo Wagner being out from the end of December, from Christmas to the end of the season, despite Paolo Banchero missing 2 months, despite Franz Wagner missing 20 games. Those are the team's top 4 scorers from last year. They had a lot of injuries and they were still 41 wins, very much they obviously were 7th, but very much a team that a lot of teams didn't want to play in the playoffs. So I think the Magic are a little further along than a lot of people think.
All right. So I think, like, if you look at the Magic's 2 biggest weaknesses, we mentioned that stat, right? This is just not a team that even in this era with Paolo, with Franz, I think partially due to those injuries, but they haven't been able to put together a top 20 offense. Obviously, giving up everything they did for Desmond Bane was a move directly aimed at addressing that. Clearly goes a long way to solving their shooting issues, as I would say, like, pretty clearly a top 5 shooter on planet Earth, ability to get to it off the dribble, legitimate 30 feet and in range. Like, he is just a genius of a shooter. My curiosity, I know I was talking to our buddy Wes over at Locked On Heat on the Locked On NBA pod, and he was mentioning that, like, as much as the shooting was a concern for them, his bigger concern was the initiation. And I took that to heart. I was like, but Desmond Bane is also really good at that, right? 96th percentile in assist percentage, according to Cleaning the Glass. You might say, well, he has ridiculous usage. Well, his assist to usage ratio is 86th percentile, right? So for a wing, he's a fantastic initiator. Obviously, Paolo can do some of that. Franz can do a lot of that. Jalen Suggs can do a lot of that. Is it feasible, like, where the Knicks and Cavs, right, are driven by these singular engines? I shouldn't even say that for the Cavs, right, because they have 2 between Garland and Mitchell. The Knicks have Jalen Brunson, and Orlando doesn't have one guy like that. Do you think they can initiate by committee? Do you think the shooting woes and the spacing woes will still crop up, even with Desmond Bane on there, or in one fell swoop, combined with some better health luck, did they address both those issues?
Yeah, it's definitely the big question. I mean, I think that is still a very fair question. Everyone kind of pointed to the Magic as needing a point guard. And I've been joking around with people all summer that, the Magic have kind of moneyballed the point guard position. Between Paolo Banchero, Franz Wagner, Desmond Bane, and Jalen Suggs, they've got a point guard in the aggregate. On top of this, just adding to the point guard point, they added Tyus Jones in free agency as well. Solid backup point guard. Like, he's probably not going to impact the end of games as much or be a starter. If he is starting, that means, someone's hurt or something's gone wrong. But I think the idea for the Magic and kind of their, like, theory for their team building and I always say this too, to be one of the best teams in the league, you've got to do something that's unique. You got to do something that makes the other teams go, we have to really worry about this guy. Like, for the Knicks, that's Jalen Brunson is probably the most, outside of Kevin Durant, the most elite mid-range shooter, and is so crafty at getting to his spots and kind of keeping you off balance. Karl-Anthony Towns obviously is the best 3-point shooting center this league's probably ever seen. You have to do something that makes defense, that makes the other team game plan for you specifically. And so the Magic sort of theory of the case is we've got players who do everything. Paolo Banchero and Franz Wagner are both 6'10" guys who play like guards. And so the question I think that about whether this experiment is going to work or not comes down to, are the Magic going to hit enough threes to give them space to do the things that they do? Paolo, but again, like Paolo averaged around 5-6 assists per game last year. Franz is up around 4 or 5 assists per game. Desmond Bane's averaged more than 5 assists per game over the last 2 seasons. I think the Magic will get that assist number up, but it's going to come down to when Paolo Banchero drives to the paint and forces the defense to collapse on him, is he going to kick out to an open shooter that's going to make the shot? Last year, that didn't happen. The Magic had the worst 3-point shooting percentage that the league's seen pretty much for the last decade. This is the fun stat of the day. The Orlando Magic were 27-10 in games where they shot 33% or better from three. 33% is still the worst 3-point shooting percentage in the league. It's literally, they had to be competent from three.
Yeah.
And they had a really good chance of winning because of their defense. Now, obviously, like, to play against elite teams, you're going to have to find a way to score against good defenses. And I think that's a fair question about what this Magic team can do. But I think the idea is they added another playmaker in Desmond Bane. They added a shooter in Desmond Bane. Paolo continues to improve as a shooter. Jalen Suggs coming back in a more catch and shoot role where he's really surprisingly effective. I think the Magic feel like just adding that little bit of space of a little bit more playmaking and shooting is going to loosen the wheel a little bit offensively and allow them to compete more consistently.
Yeah, I think it's a great point. And I do think the by committee aspect works, and just it comes to, like, I mean, you nailed it with Paolo. If you're willing to make quick decisions and just build off like an advantage and bust that door wide open and turn it into a wide open corner three, we've seen so many great offenses operate that way, right? Like the Spurs playing the beautiful games for years. Like, there wasn't, obviously Tony Parker is a Hall of Fame point guard, was an extraordinary advantage creator, but there wasn't like the one mega all NBA initiator. And it was 5 guys who were willing to do that, make quick, great decisions. I buy the idea that the Magic have a number of guys who are really good in that area, and you can bring in guys off the bench like Jones, like Anthony Black, who can continue to do that and continue to play that way, as long as, I mean, for Black having to continue to shoot better, but that's true for so many guys. There are questions there, but I think it is going to net out really well for Orlando. I have a couple more questions on the Magic. I know you have some stuff you want to ask me about the New York Knicks. I am particularly curious about the continued development of Paolo Banchero and Franz Wagner, and if they cement themselves as legitimate all-NBA type superstars. We'll get into that in just a sec on both Locked On Knicks and Locked On Magic.
Let's take a quick break from our conversation so we can say a quick word from our friends over at Monarch Money. Most people can't name all their financial accounts or even what they're worth, whether it's 401ks, properties, investments. And when you don't have the full picture, you can end up leaving money on the table. That's why there's Monarch Money. It's an all-in-one personal finance tool that brings your entire financial life together in one clean, easy-to-use interface on your laptop or your phone. Monarch does the heavy lifting for you. You can link all your accounts in minutes, see clear data visuals, get smart categorization of your spending, and finally feel in control of your money without ever touching a spreadsheet. I use a spreadsheet, and look, the system works for me, but I know I could use a clearer picture of my finances. I know I could use a smarter picture of my finances. I kind of just take averages and just kind of generally keep track of things. Monarch Money gives you that control. That's why I'm going to jump on Monarch Money here before the end of the fiscal year, as we get into the new year. I want to use Monarch Money to make sure I am hitting my earnings goals, I'm hitting my financial goals, and I'm not going crazy on the spending, especially with all the road trips I want to take this year. Don't let financial opportunities slip through the cracks. Use code LOCKEDONNBA at monarchmoney.com in your browser for half off your first year. That's 50% off your first year at monarchmoney.com with code LOCKEDONNBA.
All right, what's up? We're back on Locked On Knicks, Locked On Magic. Gavin, Schall, Philip, Rossman, Reich. We're talking superstars with the Orlando Magic. I was on Locked On NBA over the weekend, and we were drafting breakout players. I drafted Franz Wagner as my number 1 breakout player. Love his game. Love some of the underlying numbers on him and just how good Orlando is every time he's on the court. And I'm kind of shocked that he shot the ball as poorly as he has the last 2 years. Career 86% three-point shooter. For Knicks fans who don't know, he was over 35%. Oh, sorry, I might have misspoke there. 86% free throw shooter. For Knicks fans who don't know, he was at least 35% from three his first 2 years in the league, under 30% from three the last 2 years, under 20% from three in a series against the Boston Celtics where he shot a whole lot of them. And I think in general, like average fan, maybe average Magic fan, though I'm sure there's some controversy around this statement, Paolo Banchero is considered the tentpole more than Franz Wagner is. I personally think Franz, from what I've seen, is probably the better player, even though Paolo is the guy who's treated like the number one guy and the one who's just performed incredibly well offensively 2 postseasons in a row. You also don't necessarily have to pit them against each other. Like but they might both have potential to be top 15 to 20 guys in the NBA as soon as next year. Do you think that's realistic, or do you think there are still really significant strides that both of them have to make?
I think it's both. Like it's honestly both. Like they're both really good as they are. And I think, I'm not one to pit either of them against each other. To be a great basketball team, to be a championship level team, you need top players. Like for all the arguments about Jason Tatum or Jaylen Brown, it was always like, no. The Celtics are not in the conference finals without both. They're not winning a championship without both. I mean, the Knicks are the same way. And I know there's always constantly like, how can we make this team better? And it's just like, no. Jalen Brunson and Karl-Anthony Towns are two of the very best at what they do. They're the reason you're in that position. The grass is not always greener unless you're getting Luka Doncic or Anthony Davis. You're not going to drastically improve your team that way. So it really is both and the way that they play off of each other and kind of complement each other in a lot of ways, I think is really, really important too. Franz, I think Franz, to that point, like when we think about like superstar players, it's an attitude as much as anything else. And I think Franz understands he's a very good basketball player, but he doesn't have that, I want the ball and I'm going to kind of knock you out type attitude. Like Paolo Banchero has that has that everywhere. Like he's just like, I will take the superstar shots. I will take the bad shots. Franz Wagner has never been that. And he still finds a way to average 20, 25 points per game. I mean, I think one of the things that really was really helpful for him and came out of last year was that when Paolo was hurt, Franz kind of was forced to be that guy and really succeeded. Again, like he played really, really well in that role. And so now the Magic know they have that kind of in their back pocket. But I think if like just watching Franz play, like he's almost happier to defer and play off of somebody than be the quote unquote the guy. So I do think they complement each other well. But I also think it's important to remember Franz is 23, 24, Paolo's 22, 23. They've still got a lot of development to go. And I know that with the way that like the NBA collective bargaining agreement's kind of structured now, your prime has to come a little earlier. Like your championship prime feels like it's coming earlier and earlier now, like because just salaries, bloom now and it's harder to keep elite teams together with some of those big salaries. Obviously the Knicks are maybe an exception to that rule on many faces, but they're going to keep getting better. And so I feel like both are due for very big seasons. I think a lot of the arguments against Paolo Banchero are his inefficiency. And if you look at his full season numbers, he was pretty inefficient throughout the year, but he had a really tough time coming back from the oblique injury last year. If you take out that month that he came back from the injury, if you just look at his post All-Star break numbers, he played 24 games after the All-Star break. That's 24 of the 46. After the All-Star break, he averaged, I think, 29 points per game, shot 47% from the floor, 33% from three, which, obviously could still get better. He had a 58% true shooting percentage. If I'm not mistaken, that was 7th among players who had a 30% usage rate after the All-Star break. So I think Paolo has already made a pretty sizable leap, and hopefully he can get a full season, get some shooting that he can be confident in. Cause like, I think he is a willing passer. He wants to pass to open guys, but again, like the Magic shot 32% from three for the season last year, 31% from three for the season last year. It got to a point where Paolo was like, this mid-range jumper over a double team is a smarter shot than passing to an open 3-point shooter. And I can't blame him on that.
I'm sure it hits on some of the stuff that you already talked about, and the injury was part of it. Why is Orlando so much better when Franz Wagner is on the floor than when Paolo's on the floor? And obviously this is taking into account that they share a substantial amount of minutes. And you would think their net ratings, generally when you have two superstars like that who play the bulk of their minutes together, unless I'm off on that and correct me if I'm wrong, like the net rating numbers would be pretty similar. And yet last season, Orlando was plus 14 when Franz Wagner was on the floor, 98th percentile in the NBA. They were minus 2.7 when Paolo was on the floor, 38th percentile. I'd be inclined to dismiss that as a little bit of a fluke. But the season before that, they were plus 5.3 when Franz was on the floor, and they were minus 9.1 when Paolo was on the floor. Does that say like anything about Paolo's game? And like, especially again, given that caveat that Franz has not shot the ball well the last 2 years. So I would assume that there's not a huge gap in efficiency between the two. Like, is there any like logical explanation for that?
There is one that does play into it. Franz is often the one playing with the Magic's bench group. And especially the 2024 season, the Magic had, I think, the third highest scoring bench in the league. They won a lot of games because their bench was really good. And it was, Joe Ingles, Jonathan Isaac, Mo Wagner, Anthony Black, and then Franz Wagner was in that group. Jalen Suggs would join that group at times. Their bench group, when they're healthy, has been one of the best benches in the league. So if you look at the bench stats, they're going to be like saying like, no, where's this coming from? Before Mo Wagner's injury last year, the Magic had the fifth highest scoring bench in the league. And it was again, and that was with the injuries that they were facing because Franz got hurt in early December. So even deep into December, the Magic had one of the highest scoring benches in the league. After Mo Wagner's injury, they dropped to 17th or they dropped in the 20s, like 21st, 22nd. Franz anchoring those bench units, not going up against the best defender on the other team, perhaps, the way that Paolo does, I think says a lot. I think that, Paolo is learning how to be a star and how to deal with the attention that comes with a star. If I'm not mistaken, he is in the top 10, at least in the top 15 in the league in most double teams faced. And obviously some of that has to do with the shooting and the way that defenses collapse around him. He's typically in against other starters. And so I think that's where, Paolo's inefficiency as a shooter comes into play. But a lot of that is just like the situation that he's in. Franz just does not face the same level of attention and double teams that Paolo faces. Because, again, maybe Paolo is a little bit more of an ISO player than Franz is. Franz will run some pick and rolls, but he'll also move the ball. He'll score on cuts. He'll score on pin downs, and he'll score on shots in a way that Paolo doesn't always score on. And so I think there are a number of factors on this, but at the same time, yes, Franz is a much more efficient scorer. He will get to the basket a lot more effectively. Paolo's a little bit more of a bulldozer, and at times will settle for mid-range jumpers. And he's, an improved three-point shooter, but still not a great three-point shooter. So, there are obviously a lot of ways that these guys can get better. And, the Magic gave Paolo, obviously, that super max. If he's going to be worked at, he's got to climb those rankings and be a little bit more efficient and effective when he's on the floor.
All right, that's fascinating because that was maybe one of the numbers that's intrigued me the most.
Yeah, it's everyone.
Yeah. All right. Last thing on those two. How does what do we make of Franz Wagner's jumper? Because like if he figures it out, to me, like when I watch him shoot, especially in international play, and if you just didn't tell me a percentage on it, right now I was just seeing him play for the first time, be like, that guy is a 36%, 37% 3-point shooter on volume. And again, like if to everything you said, if he masters the mentality, if he figures out his jumper, like top 15 might be low. Like he might be a clear-cut top 10 best player in the NBA, right? He's that good defensively, that good getting to the rim, that dynamic. Like, is there optimism in Orlando that he's going to figure that out? It's just a matter of time, just needs to like work on it over the summer? Or is that just sort of like, all right, it's 2 years of it. This might just be who he is with like a little bit of improvement as a shooter.
Yeah, there's optimism in the fact that they know how hard of a worker he is at it. And if you've been watching, we're recording this in August before Eurobasket begins. If you've watched any of his games before Eurobasket and compare what his shot looks like now compared to what it did during the season, especially after his injury, it looks night and day. Like the form looks more fluid. It looks more consistent. It look, like everyone's been trying to figure out what's wrong with his shot because he came back from the oblique injury and had this weird hitch in his shot, and nobody would talk about it. We tried to get Franz to talk a little bit about it after the season. Like he didn't really want to talk about it. He was not super keen to talk about it. He acknowledged like, I have to get better. I have to make more threes. And I think he's clearly put more work into it. He's still comfortable enough to shoot and confident enough to shoot. But as we're recording this through 4 exhibition games, Franz Wagner is shooting 3 for 18 from 3. And it's, he was 2 for 9 in the game against Serbia. That was on the Saturday before we're recording this. There's still, at the end of the day, they got to go win. And it's not even so much about the percentage. I always say this. It's less about your percentage, which you obviously need to make threes. It's about the threat that the defense perceives of you as a
100%.
3-point shooter.
Mm-hmm.
And if you're a 20%, if you're below 30, those driving lanes that Franz wants are gone. The defenses are going to say, take that three. We'll live with you making 1 out of 5 of those, or 2 out of, or whatever the case may be. 2 out of 6 of those, whatever it is. He's just got to be enough of a threat to get defenses to pay attention to him, give Paolo that extra inch of space, give Desmond Bane that extra inch of space, or to attack a closeout when they try to get to him. They can't get to a point where defenses just stare at him and say, take that shot. And that's kind of where the Magic were at last year.
Got it. I am curious about this entire roster. I could probably spend 2 hours with you talking about the Orlando Magic. I've hogged a lot of our time. I want to talk some New York Knicks. We'll get into that in just a sec here on Locked On Knicks and Locked On Magic. All right, we are back for this crossover edition of Locked On Magic and Locked On Knicks. Philip, I'm going to cede the proverbial mic. Mine's broken to you. What do you want to know about the Knicks?
I think the biggest thing that I want to know is because I'm a huge fan of what the Knicks did last year and what the Knicks have done over the last 2 years. But my big concern for them is what is the effect of, for all his eccentricities and everything everyone always complains about him, what is going to be the biggest effect of switching from Tom Thibodeau to Mike Brown?
It's a great question. And I think the hope would be lineup optimization is the most obvious one. He played the Knicks starters. Knicks fans cover your ears because they're tired of hearing me talk about this, but they played the Knicks starting 5 played over 1,800 possessions last year. I haven't looked at the numbers in a while. So I've thankfully maybe blotted them out of my mind. Eternal sunshine of a spotless mind. There we go. That's what I was trying to think of. I think the next most used lineup in the league was maybe 1,100, maybe 1,200 possessions, right? He played this group so much, and then you hear that, you're like, all right, well, that must have been the best lineup in the league, right, Gavin? No, in fact, after January 1st for 2025, they were net negative. I'm pretty sure they had a -3 net rating after January 1st. Smart teams, I believe the Magic are one of them, started putting their wings on Karl-Anthony Towns and their centers on Josh Hart. That destroyed the Jalen Brunson Cat 2-man game that at the time was the best pick and roll duo in terms of points per possession in the NBA. And Tom Thibodeau never really adjusted off of that. He didn't really look into 5-out lineups. Deuce McBride was the only player on the Knicks that featured in all 5 of their best lineups last season. So I thought it would have made a lot of sense to start him. Tom Thibodeau did not agree. I would have said, all right, if you're not going to do that, maybe try to go double big with Mitchell Robinson, lean into defense, lean into rebounding. He did not do that until Game 3 of the Eastern Conference Finals against the Indiana Pacers. And by then it was too little, too late. Just they didn't have the reps with that group to really make it work. Even within that series, they were much better with Deuce on the floor. They were much better with Landry Shamet on the floor. They were much better with DeLon Wright on the floor. And it seemed as if when the Knicks had success, Tom Thibodeau did not recognize why that success was happening. And despite so much good that he did, despite that he, again, is clearly the best coach the Knicks have had in 25 years, and there's a very real world where Mike Brown is not an upgrade and this backfires and the Knicks backslide, and it looks like they made a terrible mistake moving on from Tom Thibodeau. I personally can't get there because to me, it was abundantly clear they were never winning a championship with Tom Thibodeau. They were never maxing out with Tom Thibodeau, and they don't have an Oklahoma City type of roster where they have that margin for error where they could have a suboptimal coach and still win a championship. They need to be optimized in every single facet if they want to win a championship. They're hoping Mike Brown's the guy to get that done. I know I just advocated for him and mostly saying who he is not, but I think that's the best way to go about it because on paper, there are a lot of similarities between the two. And I think Mike Brown brings a lot of the same strengths to the table. The hope is, and I think an area where he does excel a little bit more, at the very least, there'll be a little bit more scheme versatility. And just by the fact that he's not Tom Thibodeau, there'll be a little bit more lineup versatility.
Yeah, I mean, I think that makes sense, and I mean, I'm a big believer of you be proactive. The Magic were proactive going after Desmond Bane. We all thought they were just going to settle for Anthony Simons or Colin Sexton and risk their defense to add the offense that they needed. I think you got to move early on these things, and Tom Thibodeau put the Knicks in a position where we can talk about them as a championship level team, and I think that's really important. Now Mike Brown is very much, I feel like, the same level of coach where he is defensive minded. And I think with all the offensive players that the Knicks have, and their offense is still scary, having a defensive-minded coach with, like Mike Brown's going to bring some warrior, he was his Kings offense was really good, even when his defense faltered. He'll bring some of that warrior style into it as well. And so I think that there's definitely room for improvement, other than the depth thing. And New York addressed, I think, adding like more players to trust this summer. I think what the Knicks, what do you think of what the Knicks did this summer to add and address some of the depth with Jordan Clarkson and Gershon Yabusele?
Yeah, I've spoken about it a lot. I mean, I think they did everything they can with the money available to add two guys that I think are, you could certainly quibble on Jordan Clarkson, but I would argue two guys that are probably playable over, like you always hear the term 16-game players, right? Two guys that could probably get on the floor in the NBA Finals. I think Jordan Clarkson is really underrated as a shot creator, given like who his teammates were on the Jazz, given that there was just a terrible team. And certainly his defense at times will hurt the Knicks. And the Knicks, interestingly enough, even though offense was a problem for them in the second half of the year, like again, after that January 1st date, they were 16th in offensive rating after being a historically good offense early in the season. I do think they can solve a lot of that again with just better lineup usage, but Clarkson takes his strength and makes it even stronger with his ability as a shot creator, his ability to hit off the dribble threes. And if the Knicks did have a clear-cut weakness that got exposed offensively somewhat in the playoffs, I think it was the lack of shot creation beyond Jalen Brunson and maybe not quite enough shooting, at least in the context of like the Boston Celtics and the Indiana Pacers. And they solved both of those to some extent in Clarkson. Yabusele, I think, maybe doesn't quite have those highs, but in terms of just a player who doesn't take a lot off the table, right? Like solid, like at worst, a slightly below average defender, 42% above the break 3-point shooter, ability to attack closeouts, good in transition, and just like a dog with a W, right? Like he's going to get after. We all saw the dunk on LeBron in the Olympics last year. Like I'm really excited about his competitive spirit and how he'll fit in on this team and maybe like, again, help return them to the heights they had just from like, I guess like a psychological perspective in that 23-24 season. And I think they lost maybe a little bit of that edge last season, even though it was very apparently still there when they had back-to-back 20+ point comebacks against the Boston Celtics. So I think both those guys are great. I do think, and this is something who knows when this episode's going to come out, who knows when that episode's going to come out, but with Josh Lloyd of the Locked On Fantasy Basketball Podcast, the deep depth is still a little bit of a concern from them, right? I think 1 through 9, the roster is I'd put up there with pretty much any in the NBA. 10 through 14 or 15, like some more questions. They still have one more spot to fill, will likely be Landry Shamet or Ben Simmons. Malcolm Brogdon is a dark horse for that final spot. I'm hoping personally it's either Brogdon or Shamet, and I think those guys could go a long way to quelling some of those concerns. The Knicks did benefit from remarkably good health last season. And if they, like you made the point right at the beginning of the show, if that flips for the Knicks and they have the wrong injury at the wrong time, just like so many teams in the Eastern Conference, I don't know if they have the margin for error to survive that, even if they've optimized on the margins as much as they can, unless you're the Thunder. Like it feels like no team has the depth to survive the wrong injury at the wrong time these days.
Yeah. And I mean, like, and no team can survive like injury to the top guy. And I think that's a little bit what happened maybe in 2023. The other thing I wanted to ask is, I'm a big believer in continuity. Like I think like experience, having gone deep in the playoffs, matters as you're trying to build and grow. Being able to come together as a team very quickly matters. The Knicks obviously made the trade for Karl-Anthony Towns super late last year, and they were still successful and they made it deep. What do you expect from year 2 of Cat, now that he may be a little bit more comfortable in his surroundings, and even with a new coach, like the players are more comfortable with him than maybe they were as they were figuring it out last year?
Yeah, so it's a great point, and it's something I always think about because you are balancing continuity with fit and collective IQ, I think. And the last part has probably always been the issue with Cat, particularly in the defensive end of the floor. And like there were the Athletic put out what was I don't want to say hit piece in the sense that I think it was fair and it was probably warranted, but pretty much the second the Knicks lost last year, a piece dropped talking about the collective frustration with Cat's like just inability to know the coverage, right? And you could be forgiven for having slow feet. You can be forgiven for having like high hips and just not being great at playing, like just not a great drop defender from a physical perspective. And Cat certainly just like, despite all of his athleticism offensively, has some physical limitations on the end of the floor. What's paramount is that to offset that, you know the coverage every single time. And there were just so many times, like even throughout the playoffs, where it was pretty clear Cat didn't know the coverage. And you could see the frustration of Mikal Bridges, who so many of those mistakes were often pinned on. And he was lamented, like rightfully, is like B-ball indexes. I think he was their worst high volume screen navigator in basketball last year. But a lot of that, like it becomes really difficult to be a high level screen navigator when you don't know what you're getting on the other end of that, right? You don't know, like your bigs and drop when he's supposed to be at the level, or vice versa. So some of that is on Cat to just have a little bit more discipline, be a little bit smarter. You still saw some of those same mistakes in Minnesota in terms of like frustration, committing stupid fouls, like constantly like going full speed to the basket, which sometimes resulted in awesome shots, often resulted in him on the floor while another team came down 5-on-4 and got an easy layup. Some of the mental miscues have to get cleaned up. And Mike Brown can also help him with that, right? By playing him in different schemes like Cat. And it's questionable how sustainable this is as a regular season strategy, but he looked far better against the best teams in the NBA when he was allowed to switch. And he had surprising success on guys like Jaylen Brown, Jason Tatum, Trae Young, like holding up on an island versus playing drop defense, which was Tom Thibodeau's preference. And it was not even a square peg into a round hole, right? This is a test of my shapes knowledge, but it was like a rhombus into a dot. Like it just didn't work. And I'm hoping Mike Brown acknowledges that and says, all right, we're going to try some zone. We're going to try some switching. We're going to try some blitzing and then recovering, right? Just mixing it up, using them different ways. Maybe that makes it even harder on Cat from a mental perspective, but I think all that can go a long way to mitigating his weaknesses, and you can lean into his strengths, which include being, I think, just flat out one of the great shot makers on planet Earth. We saw it against the Pistons. He bailed the Knicks out multiple times. And when he was allowed to, which is why I'm not really an advocate of starting Mitchell Robinson, when he was allowed to play as a 5 and he was guarded as a 5, like we saw him against the Indiana Pacers, like he was just completely terrifying and unstoppable for stretches of that series. A lot of that success came when Jalen Brunson was on the bench, and that's one of my big concerns. Like both those guys seemingly look better when the other's not on the court. Again, I think surrounding them by shooting will go a long way towards fixing that. But I'm fascinated if there could be legitimate two-man synergy there, and that's not all on Cat. Like Brunson would consistently miss like these simple like tossbacks in like hook passes back in pick and pops for easy threes. So I do think chemistry plays a role. I also think IQ will play a big role in their success.
Yeah, and look, it's I think seeing that on tape helps, and you know, hopefully like Mike Brown is. I don't think it's crazy. Mike Brown's a little bit more of an innovative offensive coach than Tom Thibodeau was. I think some of that might be Thibodeau's like stubbornness. Like, you know, the Magic are a good example of this. Like, this is just generally what I feel about defenses in the league now. It's not about stopping the other team. It's about being willing to, especially against the elite teams, figuring out what you're willing to concede and committing to stopping everything else. And so like the Magic generally had a very successful series against Boston. They obviously didn't score enough and Boston got loose, but the Magic entered that series with the strategy of we're not letting Boston take a single three. You know, they average what, 40 something threes per game. They average like 32, 33 in the series. They were switching 1 through 5. They didn't care if Jason Tatum was taking Wendell Carter off the dribble or Jaylen Brown was taking Wendell Carter off the dribble. They trusted, and Dell's obviously probably a better defender than Cat is, but they were like, you're on an island, stop, you know, do your best, make them work for it. And, you know, Boston made all the mid-range shots they missed against New York, which did not make watching that Knicks Celtics series any more enjoyable for me.
Sorry.
No. We softened them up for you. But like at the end of the day, like there's like, that's the shot the Magic want them taking. That's fine. If they beat you making that shot. And at the end of the day, like Orlando lost that series because Boston did get their threes going in transition, especially. So the Magic they didn't have the offense to keep up. And that's ultimately the whole game for the Magic this year too, just as I'm sure New York has, you know, the one thing that tips things one way or the other in their favor. So it's interesting to watch how these teams defend, because like, again, there's no perfect defensive player anymore. It feels like, and defense is so hard in this league right now with how efficient these offenses are.
Yeah, it is a matter of like there's a luck component to it, right? Like, I mean, against the Celtics, the Knicks gave up 150 open threes in games 1 and 2, and they won in part because they followed what Orlando did, right? And they switched a lot, and they mucked things up, and they made some of those shots really tough on Boston. Boston could have been hot, and they could have made a lot of those shots. And then maybe Jason Tatum doesn't tear his Achilles and Boston doesn't blow up their team this offseason, right? Like it is crazy. And some of that is just the reality of the second apron, but how much like the future of a franchise hinges on like just the variance of makes and misses over a game or two. And that could ultimately define which of this team beats the other.
I want to thank Gavin once again for coordinating this. He's the one that initiated this. That's why the Knicks are on the left side there. I want to thank Gavin once again for coordinating this conversation. Hope you learned a little bit more about the Knicks and what they're going through and kind of how they've developed into a championship level team, as well as get some perspective on, get his perspective on the Magic as well. We're going to be back tomorrow for part 2 of this conversation. We are going to talk at that point about how the Magic and Knicks actually match up, how they go head to head, because they've had some fun games in the past. They're going to have some fun games in the future. Very realistically, a team that we see in the second round of the playoffs, if not the conference finals. I can finally see you in the conference finals, not as a joke, but as an actual thing. It's fun. It's a fun time for the Magic. But that's going to do it for me today. I want to thank you all again for listening to today's episode of Locked On Magic. You can, of course, find me on Twitter at @PhilipRR_OMD and on Blue Sky at PhilipRR. You can subscribe to the podcast at Apple Podcasts, Stitcher, TuneIn, Himalaya, Google Play, Spotify, Odyssey, and all the fun places you download podcasts to your podcast-enabled listening device. You can also check us out on YouTube. Just search for Locked On Magic. For the latest on the Orlando Magic, be sure to check out OrlandoMagicDaily.com. You can find us there on Twitter at @OMagicDaily. And for even more Orlando Magic content, be sure to check out my Patreon page, the Orlando Magic Hub, at patreon.com/Orlando Magic Hub. As always, thank you for your support. Now that you're done listening to me, go make Locked On NBA your second listen of the day, because as you can tell, there is no offseason. Doug, Matt, and Hayes keep you up to date on contract negotiations, rumors, and everything you need to be the most informed NBA fan. Find Locked On NBA on YouTube or wherever you listen to podcasts, all part of Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. That's going to do it for me today, though. I want to thank you all again for listening to today's episode of Locked On Magic. We'll be back with Gavin on tomorrow's episode of Locked On Magic. But until then, for Orlando Magic Daily and Locked On Magic, this has been Philip Rossman-Reich. We'll see you all again next time for another episode of Locked On Magic.